Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Braden. And cereal first or milk first into the bowl?
Oh, cereal first, 100%. If you put the milk in the bowl before you pour the cereal, you're asking for milk all over the counter and in all the places you didn't even know, like under the microwave or in between count. Like it's bad news if you do milk first.
Really? Okay, so I agree with you. Cereal first is the way to go. But I've never had how would the milk get everywhere? I don't understand that.
Because the milk is in the bowl and now you're
Yeah.
pouring the cereal into the bowl. So
Oh,
just
the
splashing
cereal's
milk everywhere.
splashing them. Okay, I
Yeah.
gotcha. I
Especially if
was
you use like a
wondering if,
larger cereal, like a mini wheat
okay,
or something like that, that's coming in with a little bit more heat. It's got more surface area.
something heavier.
Yeah, it just sends the
Sure.
milk everywhere.
Hmm.
I imagine it would. I've
Interesting.
actually
Okay.
never done it that way, so I guess I can't say for certain, but I've never wanted to gamble on it. So
That's okay. Well, I respect the
cereal
honesty
first,
there.
milk
It
second.
is interesting. It is interesting having such a strong opinion about something when you've never tried the opposite, you know. But to be fair, I'm on board. Like I'm also a cereal first person. I was wondering for a second if you were thinking that the milk like ramps in and then out of the bowl like it's at a skate park or something.
No, no, no.
Um,
It's that the cereal cannonballs into the
yeah,
milk.
with a heavy cereal, I think I could see that. I've actually had the opposite problem though. Like with the cereal first, if you've got a well-filled bowl, that sometimes the milk bounces off of the cereal at weird angles. If you've got something, I have gluten-free cereal, but something akin to like squares, like a mini wheat or like Chex or like Shreddies,
Yeah.
something like that, or cornflakes for sure on the cornflakes.
Oh, yeah,
Like
because it's the
they
random
deflect the
ridges
milk.
and yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's yeah. With I've had that problem with the cereal first, but yeah.
I guess yeah, I've never actually tried. I'll be honest. I've never tried putting the what's it called? The milk in first and then the cereal, but I'm so certain it's a bad idea that I don't even want to try it
Yeah.
just to confirm that I'll let somebody else do that.
Yeah. What I have done is I'm definitely not a milk first person. But what I have done is cereal, milk, you eat your cereal, there's leftover milk, and then you put more cereal in to finish up that milk with that cereal. And the experience I've had there is with the first bowl, it's nice because the milk works its way around the cereal. But if you pour the cereal in on top of the milk, then the cereal just stays on top. It doesn't really sink down at all because it's not as heavy as the milk.
Yeah, it just floats, especially depending like if you had something like Rice Krispies,
Yeah.
like that's really buoyant
Yeah.
compared to something that would
Like I,
more than likely sink or I get what you're saying, like absorb into the milk.
yeah. And like if the milk goes around the cereal, then it's going to absorb and it kind of weighs it down in itself. So it's nice. But yeah, I can't think of a cereal that wouldn't float if you poured it in afterward.
Yeah, the other thing with the milk before the cereal is I feel like it's easier to gauge how much milk you need
Mm-hmm.
with the cereal in there first. I don't actually know how much milk I pour into a cereal bowl now that I think about it because I always gauge it off of
Yeah.
how much cereal is in there, which I normally fill the bowl
Mm-hmm.
because why use half the bowl?
Yeah.
If you're inviting me to use a lot of cereal, I'm going to use a lot of cereal. Why not?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you fill the bowl, and I feel like that lets you figure out the milk and based on the cereal because certain cereals I think go better with more or less milk
Yeah.
as well. And so
Yeah.
that always lets you gauge how much milk you actually need.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah, because then you not only like you're filling the bowl with cereal, the milk goes around the cereal, so you legitimately have a full bowl of cereal and then the requisite amount of milk. But if you go the other way and you fill up the bowl maybe halfway with milk, then you get a half bowl of cereal because it's sitting on top.
And then you wonder
You
why
know,
you're hungry later.
yeah, and you don't know if you have Like you might have enough milk, you might have too much. It's tricky. It's tricky, but this is one that I think people fall real hard on one side or the other, and it's just they can't see the other side. And
Do you
we're not
know
the
people
same.
who put the milk in first?
Bronwyn does, yeah.
I don't think I've ever met anybody. And even like in first year of residence, I'm trying to think like if I witnessed anybody. I feel like if I did, I would have called them out for it. But like, what are you doing? Like I would have been there putting the cereal in and be like, "You okay? Like, are we good?" You'd be
Yeah,
like, "What?" I'd be like, "You just put the milk in first. Are you good?" Like I'm very concerned for you right now.
that's
I
funny.
feel like I would have said something. So I
Yeah,
don't think I can think of anybody who puts
yeah.
the milk in first because that's
I
not okay.
certainly, I certainly believe you'd confront anybody you saw doing that. But yeah, Bronwyn does, and it baffles me.
What's the
Thankfully, she doesn't.
rationale?
Uh, honestly, I don't know. I think we talked about it once, but I think I forgot because it just
It's
didn't make
probably not that
sense to
good.
me.
It's probably
Yeah,
not a good reason.
yeah.
It's not
I'll
worth
have
remembering.
to, I'll have to ask her about it. But yeah, thankfully, I don't. She doesn't have cereal that often, and when she does, I don't typically see her pouring her various substances, so
Yeah, that's good.
it doesn't get under my skin, you know. But yeah, it seems kind of like a similar thing to, in my head at least, to like if you're brushing your teeth, do you put water on the toothbrush and then the toothpaste, or the other way around?
No, you wet the toothbrush first. You're not trying to like get rid of all the toothpaste you've put on.
Interesting. See, I wet the toothbrush with the toothpaste already on it.
No, 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 no. Because
Yeah,
what if
I
you open
do.
the tap a little bit too much and then the
I
water
don't.
pressure and it just
I
blasts the toothpaste off the.
I don't because I open the tap first and then I put the toothpaste underneath. I don't like I'm not sitting there waiting for the water and then crank it, you know.
Yeah, no, no, no. You open up the tap, you soak the toothbrush, you turn off the tap, and then you apply the toothpaste. And you know that you're getting all the toothpaste from the tube on the toothbrush into your mouth to keep your teeth clean and healthy.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I understand that rationale. That makes sense to me. I don't do that because I know that I'm not washing any of the toothpaste away because I have experience doing it this way.
I
And
wonder
then
how
I
the
feel
dentists do
like
it. The next time I'm at the dentist, I'm going to watch and see how they do it.
that might be the right answer. I honestly feel like it doesn't really matter. Um, to
Probably
me,
not.
I feel like I get a little bit more water on the toothbrush because I feel like the toothpaste catches some too. So for me, that makes sense. The other one I think is similar. Is do you put ketchup on the side of your fries or do you like spread it all over, like doing the crisscrossy kind of thing?
I'm not a ketchup on fries guy.
Really?
No.
So do you have toppings? Like, do you do any toppings on fries?
Yeah. Have you ever done like a spicy mayo with fries?
Sweet potato fries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's on the side and you dip it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think if you would be an absolute animal if you put anything like, unless it's like if it's like a cheese fry, like a chili cheese fry, kind of like this is a thing that the restaurant is giving you.
Yeah.
That's fine because they know what they're doing. But if you want fries with and you like put the sriracha mayo all over it or the chipotle mayo all over it, or I don't know, like do people put mustard on fries? If you put mustard all over your fries, you're an animal.
I really like mustard. I've never put mustard on fries.
Yeah, I don't know what other toppings would go on fries, but if you put them on top, I feel like you're an animal.
If
Unless
you
you're a
put it on
restaurant.
top, then you now have to eat it with a fork, I feel like. And who
Yeah,
eats fries with a fork?
that's right. But I do have ketchup. I put it on the side because I like to control the amount of ketchup I put on a fry. Um, but I'm very on board with sweet potato fries and like a chipotle mayo from Beer Town. Actually, I've recently discovered has the best, absolute best I've ever had.
Yo, Beer Town's
It's
good.
incredible. Beer Town is
An
amazing.
underrated spot.
I think they have the best burgers in KW too, for sure.
Possibly.
Yeah, this is my opinion. But
It's a good
yeah,
spot though. It's hey, if I was in KW and someone said, let's go to Beer Town, I'm not arguing with that person.
yeah,
I'm going.
100%, 100%, 100%. Um, yeah, but anyway, that's enough. That's enough food talk. Or yeah, that was a lot of food talk.
That's,
We've we've done enough. We ran the course. We've done as much as we could with the food talk.
yeah,
Now it's time to take a break,
correct.
which is what we're talking about today. Taking a break in your training, aka deload weeks. Or it could be more than a week. Deload periods, we'll say.
Deload, unload, taper.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're all a little different, but yeah, you're talking about letting a training thing run its course. You've made your improvements. You've gotten better. Now, what do you do to unload the body? Recover a little bit and then come back and be in a good spot for competition, your next block, whatever it is you have on deck for your, your next move in your training cycle, your training plan.
Mm-hmm. And so I feel like the first thing or the most important thing to talk about is like why, like, especially for beginners or, I mean, beginners probably don't really need to deload, until they've made a significant amount of gains. But even talking to a beginner, like maybe they've hit their first plateau or whatever, and you say to them, I mean, maybe you should take a deload and like take training a little bit easier for a couple weeks and see how that goes. I feel like they just be like, okay, so I want to get stronger, I want to get faster, and you're telling me to not work out. That sounds like witchcraft, you know.
That sounds like putting the milk in the bowl before the cereal. Why
Yeah,
would I do that?
There's no rationale here, but there is. In this case, there's rationale.
Yeah, and to me, the rationale is you need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't do it and plan it into what you're doing, injury is going to force you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's preferable to deload or unload the body by your own choice, by changing the volume or the intensity or something like that, than it is to get hurt and have options off the table because you pushed too far, too much, too long. Something gave out and you go, oh, well, now I'm injured. Now I have to take time off, whether I liked it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, planning for it too, then you don't need to take nearly as much time off because you're planning that 1 week or however long. You don't need to take maybe 5 weeks. Your injury impacts your training.
Exactly. And injury is always going to be longer than whatever sort of unloading strategy you've planned.
Yep.
So maybe it sucks for a week or two, but it's better than 6 weeks of injury.
Yeah. But you can also make it work for you too. Like there's other advantages that taking that deload other than just, injury prevention, can work for you, and taking the time to plan them makes sense so that you just don't push things too far. Cause I think everybody's been in the situation where like their block's going really well and they're really enjoying the progress and stuff. And it's maybe hard to step away from that. But if you've planned it ahead of time, then you're like, okay, this is smart. I know I did this for a reason. So
Yeah, it makes it a little bit easier to then, let go of a phase or a cycle that's going well.
mm-hmm.
And you go, okay, well, this was part of the plan. It was supposed to work this way. It is working this way. This is great.
Mm-hmm.
Now I need time away so my body can adapt and recover and play catch up and end up in an even better spot. So now when I move on to my next phase or the next block of training, I'm prepared to go and I'm not carrying over fatigue or residual side effects of the previous training block that I was in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So for me, when I'm planning deloads, I've mentioned a couple of times that the first couple of blocks when I'm coaching somebody, we take the block past where it should be so we can see how far they progress essentially. So if you've got, if they can progress for 4 weeks, you take it to 5 and 6 just to make sure. But then once you're sure that it's 4 weeks, they can progress for every subsequent block is 4 weeks long so that we're maximizing the amount of time that they are adapting to a given stimulus. And then deload week. So essentially for me, like it's very consistent. Sometimes like most people it's 4, sometimes it's 3 and then a deload, sometimes it's 5 and then a deload. The most I've done is consistently the most I've done is 7, I think 7 weeks and then a deload. Deloads in that situation would be longer. But it's pretty consistent that way, just based off of how they adapt to training. Um, but I remember when we were working with basketball for sure, a lot of the times we programmed the deloads on holidays or around holiday weeks, which I thought was really, really smart because they're going to be away for a day anyway and potentially getting a little bit inebriated from time to time around those days. So it makes sense to kind of reduce the training intensity. And I was curious if you still did that, or if you had any new thoughts since then about scheduling deloads.
Well, I mean, I haven't really had to think about any form of deload or unload or taper or anything for a long time because we haven't been competing. We haven't had consistent training.
That's a good
The
point.
week or two you get off because things shut down because of the Rona is a chance for your body to unload, and you're kind of coming back from that. So we haven't actually had to think about it like all that much. I still do tend to plan the deloads in and around holidays or time off because you take advantage of the schedule in that way, and you maximize the number of days you can train and minimize the lost time,
Mhm.
right? Because if you have 4 weeks in a month and one of those weeks is a holiday or has a holiday in it, if you schedule an unloading week in one of the other weeks, now you've got 2 effective training weeks and 2, not as effective training weeks.
Mhm.
So you might as well maximize the amount of effective training time you can get. It's a little different here with track because we don't abide by holidays. Um,
Mhm. Interesting.
yeah, so it was a bit of a transition because normally, if Canada Day is a holiday or here in Alberta, Remembrance Day is a day off. So like it's a long weekend. I don't remember that ever being the case in Ontario.
No.
Um, so it's a little bit different because normally those would be times where I'm looking at the calendar going, if we think about like September at the start of the year, you're looking at that first chance to unload them a little bit, maybe around Thanksgiving, first or second week of October. But with like track, for the most part, we go in, we open up the facility, we train on that day. Like I'm convinced people on the team have trained on Christmas Day. I'm almost certain of it.
Mm.
I don't know for sure, but I'm certain of it that somebody's done it. So yeah, so you end up making the deloads and the unloads more so around like what do I need to accomplish before we go into competition,
Mm.
and then where is the transition point? More like what you're talking about, like okay, I need 5 or 6 weeks. Okay, then I'm going to unload. Okay, I need 5 or 6 weeks again, and then I'm going to unload. Now we're going into the competition phase,
Mhm.
as where, yeah, with sports and programs or things that are abiding by the time off or things like that, I'm scheduling March break as an unload week or Christmas holidays or other things like that to take advantage of the schedule and the calendar.
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. Like, is it just like U of A track, or does like track didn't work like that at UW for you, did it?
No, like we would do stuff over like the holidays, like or
Mm.
closer to Christmas, for example, because you're off for 2 weeks, but you have your season starts right after that.
So yeah,
So
you
you
can
have to do
afford to take.
some form of training,
Yeah.
but like I never trained on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve or Boxing
Mm.
Day. Like those days were normally off, or Thanksgiving I would go home for the weekend. I would maybe just do something on my own, but we didn't have like organized formal training. Like you did what you could with facilities being closed.
Mhm.
So this is the first case
Hmm.
that I've kind of dealt with that. And even at Waterloo, like I had the keys to the weight room. If we wanted to, like if I told one of the coaches, hey, let's get team A or B into the weight room that day, like we could have done that. But I thought it was more valuable to use that just as an easy way to figure out where we're going to deload and unload.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, you're dealing with like it's not their lives; it's a portion of their life, so they're gonna want to be going home and like some people are living very far away from where they go to school. So it makes sense to, yeah, you give them that time. And if you're here, that's cool. We can do stuff. And if you're not, then that's also fine. So,
So it has changed my view a little bit where there has to be a happy medium, I think.
mhm.
I don't think, like, for example, the like reading week, unless it's coming after your season. Um, but like taking all of reading week off and doing absolutely nothing, I don't think is beneficial. Taking 2 or 3 weeks off at Christmas, I don't think is beneficial. So I do agree with trying to minimize maybe some of the large gaps in training and trying to find ways to, keep people training. But for the one day, holidays, like a long weekend or something like that, it's like, yeah, just schedule an unload week somewhere in there. I don't think it's so important that on Thanksgiving or Easter Monday or Friday, whatever, that, Canada Day, things like that, that people have to get into a training session.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely don't agree. Like when I program deload weeks, like nobody ever is taking a full week off. That, but yeah, definitely for me, scheduling at this point, if people are competing, it comes down to, okay, competition's here. We need 4 weeks before that. So deload is going to be 1 week before that, and then another 4, deload another 4, deload kind of thing, and just map it out that way.
Yeah, you're always
Um,
working backwards. I think that's the best way to do it.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. If especially for like individual sports where you legitimately can peak for one day uh and then come back. And I mean, to some extent it would work that way for individual sports, or sorry, team sports too, but if you're playing, a couple times a week, once a week, it becomes messier that way, and you kind of have to just get it when you can.
You have to do
And
a
then
lot more on the fly with team sports.
yeah, because you kind of have to do like a mini taper before every game anyway. Um, at least if it's a once a week kind of thing, you can't afford to be training hard the day before a game in most cases.
Yeah, I mean, so like the approach that we're talking about right now works well in an off season. Like
Yes.
you could map out like April, May, June, July, August with like a
Yep.
varsity team, for example, that way, knowing that we have to be back in camp playing our sport in September.
Yep.
But once September hits and you're kind of in the season, you're doing things a lot more reactive
Yes.
where like, oh, that game went into triple overtime. We weren't banking on that. Okay, we're taking an extra day off.
Yes.
Or
Absolutely.
it becomes way more unpredictable is where with individual sports, even what you do within the sport is more predictable.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
most of your athletes are probably going in and doing 9 lifts in a day at most.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
no triple overtime in powerlifting and someone
No.
ended up doing 3 extra squats you weren't banking on, or,
Right.
there's no head to head race off in track and field where, oh, you were both cross the finish line at the same time. You better run that 400 again
Yeah.
and see
That,
who wins this time around. So,
that would be kind of cool if that happened though.
oh,
If
I feel
that's
like
how
that'd
they
be
did it.
awful
Oh, I mean, it'd be terrible
for
from,
the
I don't know.
person.
Yeah. I just think it would make track and field and powerlifting a little bit more exciting for spectators anyway.
Uh, so yeah, team sports is definitely a different beast where,
Yeah.
like you said, you're doing your best to say, okay, let's train away from the competition, like a day or two out. So then you can, have an easier practice and then a day off or a day to travel and then compete. But there's so many moving parts with a team sport that you have no control over, that, you know, you're just doing what you can to keep them healthy effectively.
Well, yeah, and actually, that's now that I'm thinking about it, as we've had this conversation, I feel like if I'm thinking about a deload week, it's between two training blocks where you're trying to push and like legitimately push the envelope of what your body is capable of, so you can get better, and then take a step back so you can make sure that you're doing everything you need to do to stay healthy, and then you're pushing again. Um, versus in season, you're kind of you're always managing injury risk, you're always managing fatigue, you're always managing load on the body, you're always trying to maintain everything as best as you can. So bouts of competition where you're pushing yourself as hard as you can. Um, so it's almost like in season, it's always deload in a way. Like if I think about what I'm trying to accomplish in a deload, it's manage injury risk, it's take a load off the body, it's maintain strength and movement quality as best as possible. And that's everything I'm trying to do in season. I'm not trying to get better really in season, depending on the sport. But
You're trying to get better at your sport, but you're not physiologically trying to push the envelope.
yeah, I'm not trying to get stronger or faster or more agile or whatever. I'm trying to be healthy and stay as close to as strong as I am, stay as close to as fast as I am.
Yeah, you're trying to maximize the output, like what's already there. And now I'm trying to maximize that output. So if you have X amount of speed, you have X amount of strength, whatever these qualities are, you're trying to elevate that person to as close to the top of those qualities as they can, but you're not actually trying to push the limits on those qualities because there's just too much stress on the body. You can't play your sport full time in season at a high level and then train at the same level you do in the off season to push those boundaries. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So the deloading and the unloading during the season are, like you said, completely focused on keeping somebody healthy and maximizing the ability that they currently have to use.
Yeah. I remember after first year and all the detraining that happened during the season first year, I was committed to going hard during the season during second year so that I could at least maintain or progress. And like, you definitely cannot do that.
Yeah, it's impossible.
I had a bunch of stingers that year. So yeah, there's a lot of detraining that happened. So, oh man. But yeah, so we've touched on it a little bit. What are you trying to accomplish on a deload week then? Like part of it is injury risk, or managing injury risk and taking load off the body. But is there other things you're trying to do to take advantage of that time?
Well, yeah, you're trying to unload the body and, like you said, manage risk, but you're also trying to maximize adaptation as well, right? You've done whatever amount of training and whatever focus in the block before. And at some point, you need to give the body time off, not only to recover, but also to adapt and make the changes that we want to see from the previous block. So if you're, working on a strength block or working on speed or whatever quality you're trying to maximize, it's not like you do one or two training sessions and all of a sudden you can express an improvement in that quality. It takes time. And part of that time is within the block where you're working on the training and you're providing that stimulus to the body. But then part of that is also the adaptation and the time it takes for those things to either A, structurally change in the body, or B, be something that the body can actually use. So if you look at something like hypertrophy, someone has more muscle mass, they are larger, maybe they have a change in fiber type distribution, whatever. Now all of a sudden you may need to figure out what's that period of time where, okay, I got to relearn how to move a little bit again, or I'm carrying a little bit more mass, or I'm producing more power, or I'm moving faster, or all of those things create changes in the way people move. So it's always nice after a long block of strength or hypertrophy or speed or anything, you now have these structural adaptations that you want to take place. And you need to give time for the body to not only, unload and recover from the volume and the intensity that you've put on them, but you also need time for them to physically make the adaptations that then you can try to bring into the next phase. Because it's a patient process. It doesn't just happen overnight. You don't complete a strength block and then all of a sudden you're as strong as you possibly can be. That strength might only be expressed later on. It might take a couple of weeks. So you need that unload to help maximize or promote the end adaptation of the end goal. Because the body never comes back on that upswing.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I've actually never thought about it like that. but it makes sense. So if you're going after something that's a little bit more like an adaptation that's more physical, like structural in nature, like if you have, I mean, hypertrophy is the easiest one. I guess I could think of
Is the easiest example to use.
like some kind of range of motion, because like strength has a hypertrophy component, but it also has a big neural component too. Um, so I think there is an element of like, to me, I kind of think about like you do your strength work. It depends how specific the strength work is to the strength that you're trying to express, I guess. Like if like for my powerlifters, if we're going into competition, for 90% of them, they're going to be doing singles in that last block. And so if you're practicing singles and you're doing singles in competition, then those two things are very similar. So what you've been able to do in training will be very close to what you're able to do in competition, with projecting for you're progressing through each week of training. And then we'll take a little bit of a taper to dissipate some of that fatigue. And that fatigue is, in my head, the main thing getting in the way of expressing all of that strength.
Yes, because you're building up adaptation
Yeah, you're building adaptation and then also fatigue
in conjunction with fatigue.
Yeah, so you need to take one of them away. But I hadn't thought about the physical, like building hypertrophy, and how you're going to do your 4 weeks of hypertrophy or 6 weeks of hypertrophy or whatever. And you are definitely building muscle mass over that 6 weeks, but you probably need like another week or two to get all of those benefits, and a week or two where you're not demanding so much of your body, so that it has time to actually like recover and build. So if you have a hypertrophy block, like, are you potentially intentionally taking a longer deload or doing less on the deload, to allow for that adaptation, versus a block that's more neurally demanding that might require less recovery time?
Usually, yeah, I would say so, because I mean, the other thing too is that hypertrophy carries all the, like, it probably carries more residual fatigue than a lot of other
Yes.
training, because you feel slower, you feel sluggish, you're like, it breaks down your body more than a lot of other types of training.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably the least friendly on the body. So I feel like you need more time to feel kind of back to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the one step forward, two step back process that you kind of get from training. Like we talked
Mm-hmm.
about, you build up adaptation, you build up fatigue, but you're almost kind of taking a step back because you're breaking down the body.
Mm-hmm.
And then the unloading or the deloading on the body allows you to take the steps forward. I feel like the hypertrophy work takes you a bigger step back, because
Mm-hmm.
it's just so hard on your body relative to, the rest of the training you do. And I'm sure there's a metabolic effect of that as well. Like, you have to eat more, so your body's working harder to
Mm-hmm.
deal with food. I mean, I'm not a digestion or GI tract specialist by any means, but I mean, it's stuff that your body has to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's more involved in hypertrophy than there is in other types of training. But, you know,
Yeah, I mean, it's an inflammatory, like hypertrophy is an inflammatory process too, and so you're getting like the immune system involved to some extent as well. And yeah, so there's a lot going on there for sure.
yeah. And like I said, some things are going to be harder to, you know, express or recover from. So yeah, there might be some things where, yeah, you just need a few days to kind of unload a little bit, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
back at it. Is where other things you may need, like if I think about in the course of a season, if we have a competition in a weekend, maybe you just need a day to unload after that. And then you can come back to training. But after you've done 5 or 6 competitions in a 5 or 6 week span for the season, well, now we need more time at the end of that to unload, because we're accumulating so much more
Mm-hmm.
fatigue. So different things and different factors are gonna, come into play.
Yeah, definitely a compounding effect there for sure. Um, That's interesting though. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it definitely makes sense to give your body more time to adapt to that hypertrophy stuff. And it's also like if
Which
you
is kind of why I don't
structure,
really use hypertrophy that much anymore.
which makes sense.
Yeah, because it is so destructive on the body that I feel like the benefit you get from it in some cases doesn't outweigh all the time, like the time off you have to take or the amount of time it takes to
Yeah.
see the benefits. So we're better off to do other things and let the more passive hypertrophy effects
Well, I was going to
take
say
place.
we did our hypertrophy series, so we know that it kind of happens always, and
Hmm.
especially for track athletes, like you don't need a crazy amount of muscle mass, so you're not going to need you're probably not going to need dedicated hypertrophy blocks anyway. Like your strength work is going to take care of that. Your sprinting is going to take care of that. Um, but it is interesting, like for some athletes, like if you're a freshman coming into or to play football or rugby or something, and you are actually rail thin, like you're going to need to put on some size, you know. Um, so in that situation, I can see it making some sense. And like it makes sense to give your body time to like finalize that hypertrophy, if that makes sense, like to fully adapt to everything that you already did. um but also like if you're scheduling things like hypertrophy and then strength and you want the hypertrophy to be done so that the strength works better, like it doesn't make sense to start strength before the hypertrophy is done, because then you can't fully maximize both
No, it could
things.
potentially get in the way.
And then also the residual fatigue is going to get in, because we know that strength has a large neural component. So yeah, that makes sense. There's definitely times where the best thing you can do is rest, and that's how you make the most progress.
Yeah, and even just a few days off here or there, you unload some of the volume. And like you said, you see the fatigue dissipate,
Hmm.
but it's not enough time for the adaptation
Hmm.
to dissipate
Hmm.
because the removal of fatigue is much quicker than the removal of training adaptation.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
absolutely, absolutely.
sometimes, yeah, just a few days of unloading or deloading the body is all you need to all of a sudden someone expresses way more strength, way more speed, way more power. And it's like, oh, where did this come from? Well, they were well rested
Yeah.
and they were able to do it now.
Mhm. Um, the the other main thing that I use deloads for is it's kind of also maximizing the adaptation, but in a different way. Um, it's more thinking about the next block, because with like you might run into this with the sprinting stuff specifically, because the sprinting stuff is all going to be very similar to sprinting stuff. Um, and because powerlifting is so the movements are so repetitive, if you do a bunch of squats and then you take a break and then you want to do a bunch more squats, like those squats are going to be similar to these squats,
Yeah,
you
it's the
know.
same pattern.
So I try as much as I can to change the stimulus. Like we still want to maintain the movement quality, and we still want to maintain like the pattern and strength in the movement and all those sorts of things as best we can. But it's also beneficial to try to get away from that more so, because if you can like interrupt that repetition essentially, then you can kind of resensitize to the stimulus. You know, if you're doing 4 sets of squats for 4 weeks in a row, and then you do 3 sets of squats on your deload week, and then 4 or 5 sets of squats in the next block, that's not that different.
No, you haven't truly unloaded the body from that movement.
Yeah,
It was in there the
exactly.
whole time.
Exactly. So what I what I typically will do is like 4 or 5, whatever the person is working at, whatever like a normal amount of volume is for them. And then 1 set. It's a pretty hard set, but 1 set of squats. So it's significantly reducing the volume there, and we're only squatting once when most people are squatting 2 or 3 times. And then what would be a normal squat day is going to be like some kind of like a reverse lunge or something like that, as their main movement. And then for some people, even like it might not be a competition squat, it might be a high bar squat or like a wider stance or a narrower stance or something like that. Most of the time it will be competition because even with just doing the one set of squats, I do find with some people that when they come back to week one of the next block, that the movement feels rusty. Um, it doesn't really affect performance ever, but just for that reason, I don't really want to step any further away than that. But I do find it's easy to make consistent progress doing it that way when you take a step away to kind of resensitize to the movements again.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the advantages of the deload or the unload, right? And that can be for anything. It could be if you come from a sport where there's repetitive movement. Could be if there's maybe a certain training metric you're looking at, like in a team sport environment. Maybe you use a jump mat and jump test people, or you consistently track like a 10-meter sprint time or something of that nature. If there's something that's continuous or consistent with the programming that you do, yeah, you're right. The deload and the unload is a chance to take a step away from those things as well, during that time, and like you said, just have the body do something different and resensitize it to a training stimulus that is going to be back in there again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So and I think that's a good point. It makes a lot of sense to me in something like powerlifting. Um, for other things, I would or weightlifting, it makes a lot of sense. Something along those lines. Um, for track and field, I would think it's more so like whatever your event is, that's the thing that you modify a little bit and decrease the volume of a little bit. Like the weight room stuff doesn't really matter. It's variable kind of all the time. So I think as long as the intensity is down a little bit, that's fine. Like I don't think changing the variations or whatever is going to affect the sensitivity that much, just because it's like you don't care about them getting that much better at their squatting or their split squatting or whatever. You want them to get better at sprinting, right? So you need them to be sensitive to the sprinting stimulus, or the throwing stimulus or things like that. I don't think that's a huge concern for like team sport athletes either, because like you could change the kind of squat that someone's doing every single block and that would be fine.
Yeah, and then the other thing you get from that too is that if you are changing, this is one of the things like what I mean by like you can extend the deload a little bit. So maybe there's like a certain training block we're in, and then you have a week where you cut. I'm a big fan of cutting the volume, not the intensity. I would rather keep my foot on the gas, just adjust how long I'm leaving my foot on the gas. Um, so maybe you have a 4-week training block. Now we unload for a week. That first week where you come back doing some stuff, it might be a little bit different. So it's not going to be quite as fast or it's not going to be quite as heavy. So you almost extend a little bit of that deload with a week that's maybe a little bit more novel with training, or it's a change in training. So like you said, you move from one squat to another, or you've changed the way you're doing the lunge or something like that. And then all of a sudden, because it's a new movement that the person's doing, they're not loading it as heavy as they possibly could, or they're not doing as many as maybe they possibly could. So then you do extend that deload a little bit, but then you've introduced some variation to prep and blend into the next block. So you, in that sense, you can almost deload without deloading, if that, like,
Yeah.
in that regard, because you're still training and it's a new training week, but because it's the first time you're introducing it, somebody's still exploring it. So they're probably not as confident to push the way they normally could. And then, okay, yeah, I'm getting a feel for this movement. And now we can really start to ramp it up and push the training that we're doing in that next block.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely, I'm on board with decreasing the volume, not the intensity, for sure. I think that's the best way to dissipate fatigue, for sure. It's going to help with the adaptation and resensitization, or desensitization, whatever. Um, and yeah, the way that I'll do that, because I don't want things to be super heavy. Like the load, for me, the load will decrease a little bit, but I want the effort high, I guess, if I'm can be specific, because sometimes intensity means load or percentage, but um, because I still want the effort to be high so that you're still like practicing squats that are hard or benches that are hard, and using the more neural components as well. But doing like a bigger set with a little bit of a lighter weight still gets you to the hard part of the set with less load. So if you're dealing with like more joint specific things or like tendon ligament specific things, the high load isn't going to affect them as much. And
I
then
mean,
yeah,
with strength, you can do it a little bit more that way too,
yeah,
because strength is a more resilient quality.
Yeah.
So if you were trying to maintain someone's strength, you can back off on the load a little bit, but I'm not going to unload a high velocity movement like sprinting or change direction. You could for a day or two, but I wouldn't want to go like 2 weeks without sprinting or moving fast for
No.
an athlete in a team sport or an individual sport where they had to be explosive. I'd rather just, okay, let's do way less of what we were doing, but we're still going to move fast.
Yeah, less volume for sure, still fast, or even just like changing the movement. It's still
Yeah.
fast, but
But it's
yeah,
because those qualities can dissipate
yeah,
faster
absolutely.
compared to something like strength, which is a very resilient quality. So if we unload how much you're squatting or benching for a week or two, you come back and you can still probably bench and squat exactly what you could before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's not as sensitive. So, I mean, I think that's another good point to consider is that how are you unloading them? If it's for strength or, aerobic endurance or a really resilient quality,
Mm-hmm.
you can afford to play around with both the load and the intensity. If it's a more sensitive quality, you probably have to make your change based on volume.
Yeah.
Because staying away from the higher intensity stimulus may actually set you back.
Yes.
Because you did all this work, you got faster, you became more agile, you changed direction quicker, and then you don't use it for a couple of weeks. And now it's like, okay, now you probably not completely back to square one, but you could definitely see a drop
Mm-hmm.
in performance in that.
Yeah. I think it's also important to keep in mind too, like how new these adaptations are. Like if you are at the point where you're like faster than you've ever been because you just had like one or two really good blocks of training, then like those are going to be even more sensitive probably than like if you've been maintaining whatever speed you are for like a couple of years. And same with strength, honestly. Like if you had the best block and you hit a PR and stuff, like it's not nearly as sensitive as speed. I wouldn't dare to say that, but if you don't like you don't need to hit close to that number, but you need to keep doing stuff that's challenging, or else like you will lose that stuff if you don't practice it.
Well, yeah, and if you reach a new ceiling and you've only been there once, it is hard to get back there again if you've only been there one time.
Yeah.
But if you can get there consistently, which again over time with training and higher training age, the more time you spend in the weight room, practicing your sport, whatever it is, the easier it is to consistently get back up to that high level. So yeah, you definitely are right that if all of a sudden you break through a plateau or a PR or whatever, and it's like, man, I've never done this as good as I have before. It's on thin ice.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to continue to work to keep it there.
Absolutely. And I feel like you need to, yeah, it's almost, I've noticed that too with some of my athletes where they, you test and like sometimes they hit PRs that are way bigger than what I'm expecting of them. And it's almost like I knew you were stronger. I knew you were going to hit a PR. So I'm not surprised by that. But this number is surprising because all of the work you did up to this point doesn't support that number. So then you almost have to go back to like, you can't keep them there. You can't train there because they've never been there before. You can't keep them there for a very long time. So it's almost like you need to go back to the base and like, let's raise up this amount of work so that that amount of work supports the strength that you now have, so that it's like that your
More
body
resilient.
can, yeah, your body can handle that amount of strength now,
Mhm.
versus just doing it the one time. So it's kind of, in that way, it's almost like a longer period. Like this is going to be a 3 month kind of, it's not a unload because we're seriously training, but it's, the weight is significantly decreased.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful too over time. I think from the injury standpoint with deloading and
Mhm.
unloading is that if you pull back on the training too much, then you have these large spikes in like volume and intensity.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the other reasons I like pulling back on the volume but not the intensity too much, is that you're still prepared for the high loads, the high demand, the the intensity of the movement that you're doing, whether it's sprinting, change of direction, lifting, whatever. And we don't have these large spikes in what we're doing, sort of what we've seen over the past year with shutdowns and things like that. And you've seen the ups and downs people have had to go through because
Mhm.
you're getting drastic changes in both volume and intensity because people's training environments have been flipped
Mhm.
upside down. So I think there is value in changing just one of those variables to help keep some consistency and help keep the body prepared for the load that it's going to be dealing with.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
whether that's in volume or whether that's in density as well, right? The
Mhm.
spacing between your sessions. Maybe I'm going 1 day on, 1 day off, 1 day on, 1 day off. And maybe for an unload or a deload, I'm not actually changing the amount of volume or intensity on that training day. But now maybe I'm going 1 day on, 2 day off, 1 day on, 2 day off. I've spaced the sessions out a little bit more. It's giving me more time to recover. And then I can go back to,
Mhm.
more frequent training. So for me, changing the volume or the density or spacing of the sessions to me is a more effective way to go about unloading the body and
Yeah.
helping people feel good, because then you're not consistently staying away from training, compared to like everyone talks about tapering. But if you look at the definition of tapering, it's like a very drastic drop in what you're doing. And it happens over a much longer period of time than I would, like 2 or 3 weeks, and I would want to stay away
Yeah.
from training. I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
have that drastic a change. And you really have to train a ton to truly taper. As where I feel
Yeah.
like most athletes, varsity level, people you work with, high school kids, whatever, that we deal with, unloading and deloading them is probably the best way to go about it, because yeah, taking them away from training for an extended period of time, 2 3 weeks, is not beneficial.
Yeah. No, I don't think, yeah, there's so many, yeah, there's too many things that are lost if you do it that way. And I don't know, like I've changed my opinion on tapering. Like I don't I don't think tapering in that way is that beneficial. I think there's smarter ways it can be done anyway.
And I don't even know if you train your athletes with the absurd volume or intensity you would need.
I
Like I
don't.
feel like you can really only make a taper work at the highest level where you have the opportunity to train somebody with no restrictions effectively, where the body
Yeah.
has actually gone through so much effort and work that you need to truly taper by definition of what it really is.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like in that kind of a situation, it makes sense because then you are like you're planning, like you're doing this absurd amount of volume so that you can take advantage of the taper and like super compensate and those sorts of ideas. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I agree that that tapering works that way. And then like there's too many, like there's other adverse effects to doing like crazy amounts of volume like that, like the injury thing. And then also just like it's so much time and it's so much effort and
Yeah. And it doesn't work for a
it's
lot of sports.
It doesn't work for a lot of sports.
Like you can't taper
absolutely.
in team sports. It's impossible
Yeah.
to make it work. And even in some individual sports, depending on how many competitions you have, like we couldn't taper. If I truly wanted to taper somebody I worked with in track and field, I can't really do that because if I'm trying to ramp them down 2 or 3 weeks leading up to their final competition, we're still competing.
Yeah.
I can't afford to bring them down for a, provincial or a conference championship meet that they need to be at to qualify for nationals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because now they're not prepared. So I agree with you that the tapering strategy doesn't work, I think, quite as well
Yeah.
for a lot of scenarios compared to an unloading via volume or density change.
Yeah. And I mean, it can work. It can work for powerlifting, and I've seen it work for powerlifting. It's just the other thing is like it's so variable too. Like even if you figure out, like if you nail it for one person, like it could be different the next time you do it for that person. And if you mess it up, like they might have a terrible meet.
It might be really bad.
So I think doing it more of like you make consistent progress and then you unload to get the fatigue out of there, and then like it's more reliable, consistent performance in my experience, which is why I do it that way.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. The number of times where you use an unloading strategy of, cut the volume a little bit for a week or space the sessions out a little bit more. Let's try to do in 10 days what we normally do in 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
just decreasing
people
the
look
volume.
a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you said, it's consistent.
Yeah, and I mean, if people want more of that stuff, like we did do an episode on competition prep, I believe.
Yeah.
So if people are more interested in that stuff, then they can go check that out too. But yeah, for sure, definitely on the same page there. I did hear also Cal Dietz talk about. I mentioned him a lot on the podcast, I guess. He talked about his experience with swimmers, I believe, one time where he noticed that every time they started a new block and he introduced a new exercise, then they were super, super sore, which makes sense. And then their performance in the pool suffered. And it was fine because the coach didn't care and the coach just wanted to like rail into the player or into the swimmers for being soft or whatever. So like those personalities matched up fine enough, but in a lot of situations you don't want to be dealing with that kind of a thing where right after the deload week you see people are super, super sore and like performance is suffering. You want to plan for that, like for that all happening on the deload week where that's the time when you can be like slower and take things easy and that sort of thing.
Well, that's
So
where
then,
that sort of extended unload that I was talking about can
exactly.
kind of come into play, because you may need a week to actually deload and unload the body.
Mhm.
And then the following week of training, when you're introducing some new stuff, again, the volume's probably reduced or things
Yeah.
like that to let people settle in. And now they've had 2 weeks removed from what they've previously done, but we're not training. It's not like I
Yeah.
just gave people 2 weeks off and do whatever you want and then come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's definitely something to consider as you transition from one to the other.
Yeah, well, and that's what reminded me. And if you need the 2 weeks of reduced volume or slightly reduced intensity, like take the 2 weeks and plan to take the 2 weeks, and that's fine. But what he started doing is introducing those new movements in the
The
deload
deload.
week. And because it's new, you're not going to go super heavy with it anyway. And you can do it with reduced volume.
Exactly.
And stuff like that. And then when you start your next block officially, then it's not new anymore. And I remember when we were doing the hypertrophy series that, because a big thing was muscle soreness, like equaling hypertrophy, was that some people were thinking initially anyway. But if you do this one movement or this one contraction type or volume or whatever, if you do that once, and the next time you do it, you're not nearly as sore. It doesn't even need to be to the same intensity or the same volume or whatever. Like you could do half the volume with like 80% of the intensity that you would use, and you're still like because it's not new, you're not going to have that same performance decrease. So yeah, I thought that made a lot of sense, and I used to do things a little bit like that. Yeah, I've changed how I do things, but I think
Yeah,
for team
I've done that
sports, that can
before in
make
the
sense.
past as well, or I've still done it because again, it gives you the option of do I want kind of a week between stuff or do I want 2 weeks?
Yeah, yeah,
And you
absolutely.
yeah, if you're in a little bit more of a time crunch, then yeah, in your deload week, you introduce some lower intensity things that you're going to be doing moving forward. Um, and then you can get it done in a week, or if you want to extend it a little bit longer, then maybe it's 2 weeks, and that gives you the flexibility too with different individuals. Where if you're trying to keep them on like the same program because you're working with a group or a team, but some people respond a little faster, some people respond a little slower,
Mm.
then yeah, okay, the people who respond slower, maybe only give them a week because we need more time. Like we need to get into that block quicker.
Mm.
But if they adapt pretty quick and we have the competitions coming up, then okay, we can extend this block or we can drag it out an
Mm.
extra week to give us that time frame. Obviously, you need to know the athletes a little bit better. You couldn't do that with an athlete you're working with for the first time, but that's yeah. I'm glad you brought that point up with how Cal Dietz does that because I think it gives you the flexibility of
Mm-hmm.
again compressing or expanding how long your deload or your unload period is, especially leading up to competition where you maybe want to, like we talked, you're working backwards from it.
Yeah,
And then it's like, oh, I have 5 weeks. How do I fill 5 weeks? Oh, well, let me extend the deload period in this way to get the
yeah,
5 weeks in or 4 weeks or whatever the situation is. So
yeah, for
it's
sure. And
flexible.
yeah, and I mean, like that's a good point too. That depending like how fast people respond to stuff, you change things up. Like I said before. Well, Mike Tashur, this is where like I learned a lot of this stuff from Mike Tashur. It's his kind of system, and what the rule that he kind of uses is the deload should be 1/3 of whatever the training block was. So if you progress for 6 weeks, you do 6 week training blocks, then your deload should be 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I follow that for the most part. Obviously, if you're doing like if it's 5, then you can't do like, I mean, you could do 1 2/3 of a week. I don't do that because that's messy. So typically, if it's 5 or less, then I do one. If it's um, I've never done anybody past. I've never had like consistent 9 week blocks, so I've never done 3 weeks. But so everyone else does 2 weeks, and I think that's important. And if things don't line up quite right for competition, then like I do certain things to extend their block a little bit to allow them to continue to adapt a little bit, or extend the deload, doing a little bit more volume because we're going to be in this unloaded period a little bit longer, so you don't need to drop it quite as drastically, but that way you mitigate the detraining as much as you can, while still getting the recovery because it's a little bit longer.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. A lot of ways to do it.
yeah. The only other thing that I should mention, we're almost at our time here, but I do also take the deload week to do a lot of different things, like try to move specifically in different ways in different planes. Do a lot more for me. Do a lot more unilateral stuff on deload weeks, and some other stuff that I think is beneficial, but we just don't have time for, like targeting specific muscles and movements that we don't have time to do, or I've started doing a little bit more like explosive stuff on deload weeks too, because for people that are used to moving relatively slow, it's not going to be crazy uh, neurally demanding.
Mm.
But I do think that using the nervous system in that way is also beneficial, and it's a different kind of contraction for them. So it's I think that's a good spot to use it.
Yeah. You can emphasize some of the things, like you said, you don't have maybe the time to prioritize
Mm-hmm.
during other training blocks.
Yeah.
So you can sprinkle it in every so often with each deload or unload period that you're giving to the athlete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, and then I feel like it just helps. It helps with performance a little bit, but mostly it's just health, moving in different ways, getting things used to different kinds of stimulus and things like that. So, yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to say for your deloads? No.
No, I got through my points.
Then
So we're
I have a
good.
question. I have a question for you. Do you change the volume or intensity of your music on deload weeks?
No,
Nice.
always loud.
Yeah.
And it's always depending on what I'm doing on what days. I like to listen to certain things based on time training. So the only thing that might just change is as I explore and discover new stuff. That's where the change comes in.
Mhm.
But there's always an underlying consistency of either the type of music or things like that. So maybe a different song, but you know, listen to fast stuff on fast days and listen to heavy stuff on heavy days. And that theme
Nice.
stays consistent.
That's that's solid. That's
So
solid. What were you listening to this week?
I got caught up in a bunch of, I was like scrolling through like the Google feed on my phone, and I found this mashup where this individual had taken music from, I think I've mentioned Slayer before,
Probably.
thrash metal band from the 80s. They're part of that West Coast, like Metallica, all of them, all those bands on the West Coast of the States. So Slayer, unreal band, very heavy. And they had this person was doing a mashup with like other genres and music and songs and combining different songs. And some of them were really good. And there was one where they mashed up a song by Slayer. And have you ever heard the song Rock Lobster by the B-52s?
I've heard Rock Lobster by Peter Griffin.
It's probably exactly the same.
Okay.
Because the song it's like wacky 50s, like beach rock. Pretty sure it's from
Sure.
the 50s.
Sure.
And man, they did such a good job combining
Mm.
the two. And it's so funny because you have this like upbeat, like almost kind of like dopey, like beach sounding guitar. And then you get like the heaviness of Slayer combined into that. And so there were a few different, that was one of my favorite ones. It's probably the most entertaining. And then there was one where they took the song War by Edwin Starr and laid it over top of one of the Slayer songs. And it works so well. It works perfect. You would swear it wasn't even like dub, like it sounded like, even though that song I think is from the 60s or 70s, it sounded like even though it was 20 or 25 years before whatever Slayer wrote, it sounded like they said this is going to go over top of this track, and they made it that way. So I was listening to a whole bunch of different mashups of those, and
Nice.
they were quite good.
Yeah, that's dope.
So
I
entertaining.
do love a good mashup. The favorite mashup that I've heard, I think, was I don't remember what the Linkin Park song was, but it was Linkin Park
Oh, and
mashed
Jay-Z.
up. No, it
Oh,
was Linkin Park and Undead by Hollywood Undead, which I really enjoyed that one. I think you might like it if you check it out.
give it a listen. The
Both
album
of
they
the
did with Jay-Z, where they crossed everything over, worked really well. So
yeah. Yeah, mashups they're always fun for sure.
so yeah, I was on the mashup train this week.
Mm-hmm. I took your off-air suggestion last week, and I listened to Tenacious D this week.
Oh yeah, I forgot we had that conversation last week. Yeah, because you
because
didn't even know Jack Black was like a musician.
I did not know that. No, but yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. I wasn't sure at first because it's like they're almost trying to be funny with their
It,
songs, you know?
they sort of are. Yeah,
Yeah.
like
So it's some of them are more serious than other ones for sure. But yeah, they were good. I mean, Jack Black definitely has a great voice and a lot of range with his voice. Like he can
oh
do a lot
man,
of
that
different
dude's
things
got
with it.
range,
Yeah.
like big time.
So that was good. Yeah, that was a fun listen for sure. Um, Yeah, I don't think it would ever get me hyped, but it was a fun listen.
Yeah, it's different and it's fun.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And I think that's what it's supposed to be. He's a comedian. His job is to make people smile and
Yeah,
laugh. And so
yeah,
I feel like it's supposed to be sort of fun and goofy in nature.
yeah. And I mean, I like all those funny, like those funny groups as well. Like I have listened to a good amount of Weird Al Yankovic songs, and I think they're funny. I don't listen to them really at all anymore, but at the time I definitely thought they were funny. I really do like Lonely Island. All of
I
their
knew
stuff
you were
I
going to
think is
bring that. I had a feeling.
hilarious.
I was like, I knew he was
Yeah,
going to bring this up. If
yeah,
you're talking about joke bands, I'm like, Lonely Island's coming up for sure.
yeah. I think they're great. So yeah, and oh, John LeJoie is the other one, or LeJoey.
Oh, yeah, I have heard. I
Yeah,
have heard of him as well.
yeah. So yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. But yeah, that was a fun one. There was more there than I thought there was going to be actually, which there always is, I
Yeah, I was
suppose.
going to say there always is.
Yeah,
It's never ending.
yeah. But yeah, if anyone wants to chat about deloads or let us know what else they want us to talk about, let us know on Instagram, Speed Strength Show, Speed Strength Performance, or Braden Southern. Um, and until then, that was the Speed Strength Show. Thanks for coming along, world.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.